You'll soon be taking this elevator to the roof to take a flying taxi home. Well, in a few years, rush hour may be a thing of the past. Wouldn't it be cool if this thing could just fly you home? We're creating the future of mobility.
Who is?
Who are you?
Who are you?
We are, me and my team at Supernal. Supernal is not just for the privileged few, but many people, including kids like you.
And we're working on new technology to unlock the full potential of air mobility. Supernal will bring humanity closer together and building a sustainable future.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Wherever you are in the world, welcome to the Revolution.Aero Town Hall. We've got a fantastic session today, and we're going to be focusing on infrastructure. There's lots of people out there building amazing aircraft that can fly between points and cities, within outside cities into them. But today we're going to talk about where they're going to land and take off. We've got a fantastic panel of three specialists. First up, we're delighted to have Adam Slepian, Global Head of Partnerships and Business Development at Supernal. Adam, how are you?
Great. And thanks so much for having us back, Al. Always great to be here and talking with you.
It's always great to have you guys on. Everyone saw the video, and everyone also knows Supernal is the new brand within Hyundai. Do you want to just give us like the 30-second elevator pitch?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we're really excited about our new brand. It's this brand and being part of Hyundai Motor Group as we become our division of it under Supernal is really why I came here, right? And to your point that you talked about, Al, when you came in, this is about infrastructure. We're working on our aircraft, and we're working on the infrastructure as well. So what we're doing at Supernal is really building out what we think the marketplace needs to be in the future, working by, with, and through partners internally at Hyundai Motor Group and externally, like some of the great folks that we'll have on the panel today, to at the same time got to work on the aircraft and get that so we can be an aircraft OEM. But if we don't have the infrastructure aspect, the digital, the physical infrastructure that it takes to support safe, affordable, sustainable flight in the future, it won't all come together. We just think it's such a huge, important part of the market. I'm fortunate enough in what I do every day and with the great folks that I have on my teams to go help our engineering R&D teams work on the aircraft, which is, of course, super exciting. What I think is really exciting is how do we go build the rest of this? How do we build out the infrastructure it's going to take? Vertiports, UTM, airspace management, everything that it comes with that. We're not going to build it all ourselves. There's no way that we're going to do that at Supernal. But we want to be part of that so we can drive standardization, interoperability in the marketplace, and really make this new market that doesn't really exist today come to bear in the 2020s and beyond.
It's quite chicken and egg, though, isn't it? Like it's hard to go out and build to buy the land, go and get the planning permission until the aircraft are there, isn't it?
No, absolutely. So if you look at what it takes just to build and certify an aircraft and be able to put that in production, you're talking the billions of dollars, right? And that's kind of common knowledge. What is kind of less talked about, I think now it is a lot more for the advent of urban air mobility and advanced air mobility, is that's a huge undertaking to go do the rest of it. And that's why we're working with partners across the board, both internally at Hyundai Motor Group and externally, with cities, with states, with regions, with commercial entities as well, of course, like Urban Airport, who'll be on later today, because it's a huge challenge, right? There's so many things that need to come together. It takes a long time, too. And it's capital intensive, right? So no one entity is really going to be able to own that whole piece. And that's why we're working through partnerships to do it. And that's why we're starting early, right? We have stated publicly that our entry into service for our aircraft is 2028. But we started down this path of getting involved with the ecosystem in really late 2020, very early 2021, with the intent of knowing that to be able to bring this to scale, it's going to take several years and a significant effort across the board to make it happen.
And going, are you worried that there won't be enough infrastructure? Obviously, there's going to be some cities, and you've already had talks with some, which you can take us through. Are you worried that there won't be worldwide acceptance quickly?
So I would say it's a good question, right? So quickly, I think is the challenge. I think it's really about, I'm a believer, right? I think if you believe that there's this market for urban air mobility or advanced air mobility, it's huge and it's global, but it is going to take a long time. And it's going to take a long time for it to scale, globally. I think our goal is, how do we work with the right entities, both from a commercial aspect and a public aspect, from a city, a state, with our local teams, building that through to develop the market, to get it moving in the right direction, create that standardization and operability, get that baseline that we can then rapidly deploy. We've got to prove that this can work in certain areas. So we're working with specific geographies around the world that are really kind of pushing forward and pushing the envelope for urban air mobility, so that then we can get the model right, build that blueprint, build that business model, build that operating model, build the requirements, the certification, get that right, and then be able to spread that rapidly to the follow-on cities. We won't be able to launch at scale in every city around the world and just kind of snap your fingers and it happens overnight. It's going to take time to do that. And we're strategically going to try and work through specific cities to start, build out that model, build the blueprint, and lift and shift as much as we can to the next locations. That's our intent.
Standardization is really key, isn't it? And one of the things which is interesting is there's a few cities that keep coming up, and a few places, and we've got Volocopters doing some exciting stuff in Singapore, and a lot of companies are looking at Paris because of the Olympics coming up. If you were a city listening to this, it would make sense to take at least two at a time, wouldn't it? You don't want to have a monopoly provider, but partly because you don't get the standard, or is it easier for you if you can just have one to yourself?
Well, I think we don't look at it as being one entity that becomes a monopoly in any given city for a myriad of reasons. I think when we talk about standardization and operability, I think it's a couple things. It's what does that mean, right? Let me start with interoperable. We don't see this at Supernal as a market where down the road in the future, and we've said this, before, where just a Supernal aircraft takes off from a Supernal vertiport and goes to another Supernal vertiport, or a Volo does the same, or fill in the blanks with any of the OEMs that are out there doing great work, right? We see it as, a Volo can take off and land from a vertiport that we helped develop, for example, and vice versa. I think specifically from the engagements we've had at the city, the state, the region level in multiple places across the world, that's how they see it coming together as well. Now, of course, there will be some that are just run and just facilitated just for that specific entity, potentially. But at scale, we don't really see that as the way that it's going to work. So that's when we say interoperability. The standardization aspect is that because of the certification process and all these aircraft have to function with each other, both in the air and on the ground, and connect to the infrastructure, everything from a digital infrastructure perspective to the physical infrastructure of where you put these, to what does the FADO look like, how does it interact with the aircraft, how do you get charging requirements built into the asset, the physical asset at the vertiport. Creating standardization and what those needs and those requirements are, we think is going to be paramount, so that you can develop the functioning business model that can also scale across geographies with minor changes across geographies, because there's always going to be small changes, but it's also how it interacts with the aircraft, right? If imagine everything was completely different if you were flying in commercial aviation today, in general aviation from London to DC, and every aircraft came in and had to have different equipage, and everything was completely different. It didn't all connect with each other, right? That's where that standardization will create that interoperability that we can we can have this thriving market for air mobility in the future.
When we talk about the infrastructure, you're talking about, when you say digital infrastructure, what are you talking about specifically?
So I think it's several things. For example, is the UTM, the airspace management aspect of it. How do we connect all that? And through the team here at Supernal, we've launched our initial UTM consortium with 4 great companies: Skyroads, OneSky, Altitude Angel, and ANRA, which we're really excited about because it has some really great global coverage as well. So we can start pulling, what is that digital interface going to look like? How are we going to manage airspace and use the right digital aspects? from planning purposes, from cybersecurity, everything that we can think of to make sure that we can pull this together and have multitude of aircraft in the same airspace at the same time in the future. So that's one aspect of it. How do we connect the ground control stations or the vertiports or however that determines to be with the aircraft? How do we also integrate it with the multimodal mobility solution? So that's another aspect which is really interesting about the piece that we're working from the ecosystem development aspect and the business model aspect. Is, of course, here at Supernal, we have our friends from Hyundai Motor Group, and with a laser focus on integrating the air aspect into the ground mobility to make a truly multimodal mobility solution. So there's a whole aspect of how do we, if you're getting a ride in a Hyundai Palisade, right, to get to the vertiport, and it's autonomous in the future on an Ioniq 5. How do we integrate those digitally so that we can get the planning right, we can get the timing right, everything down to that level, right? So it really is all encompassing of everything that you'd think of traditionally in aerospace management or in aviation, and how do we combine that with the ground aspects that we're going to be bringing to the table as well.
And the ground aspect, it's not as simple as me going out, cutting my front lawn, putting out a cable saying plug your aircraft in when you want to.
No. So one thing is the digital connection piece of making the business, the operation work, right? The other is, which we're doing some great work on with our team led by Yash Prem Kumar. I think he's been on here before and is always fantastic, is understanding the energy requirements, right? And that's another piece of standardization and operability as well. Understanding the energy requirements across the industry so that we can bring that source of energy to the point where the aircraft will charge. And that's not an insignificant amount, right? And that's where we work with folks like, Clint, who we'll talk to from the Urban Movement Labs, via the city of Los Angeles, and understanding what is that going to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 to 20 years from now, so that we can get the right energy source at the right time with the right requirements. Of course, we're looking at that also both on-grid and off-grid. From Hyundai Motor Group and the hydrogen wave aspect, hydrogen fuel cells and availability of hydrogen fuel, also really, really important to the group. And we're working with some specific organizations, public and private, so that we can push the advent of hydrogen fuel as well. And I think Andrea will talk about that a little bit, but not to steal our thunder, but one of the aspects of this major project that we're working with Urban Airport, coming up in Coventry, is we'll have off-grid fuel source from a fuel cell generator, right? That we can use to charge the asset, charge cars, et cetera. So we're working on identifying how do we start scaling that as well, because it's also something that's gonna take some time. We want to get ahead of it.
So one of the things that you and Yesh always use is collaborating, or you use the word collaboration a lot. How are you working with Urban Airports, who we've got coming up next?
Yeah, so very closely, right? We've been partnered with Urban Airport for some time now, have recently become an investor in Urban Airport, really believe in the team, really believe in the mission, very strategically aligned with what they're trying to do. And super collaborative on developing out the Air One, which will launch here in April. Well, not here, but in the UK in April, which we're all really, really excited about. And it's not just about building that one prototype vertiport. It's everything from the design element that goes into it, how it's going to interact with the airspace, how it's going to interact with our aircraft and other aircraft as well. How it's going to interact with that multimodal mobility solution that we talked about, right? Because we kind of see it all coming together as, for lack of a better term, that hub, no matter what size that, you'll have vertiports that are hubs that are much bigger, and you'll have some that are smaller, but it's kind of the hub of the operation, right? It's a way that you can not only, you can bring people, cargo, et cetera, standardize that as much as possible using the same technology, using the same assets, using the same footprint. And then how do we get whatever that cargo or passenger carrying piece in quickly, efficiently, safely, get it through the vertiport, get it to the aircraft, and get it to its next destination. So everything from the digital footprint, the physical design, the efficient operations and operating model of the vertiport and how it works with with our model of what we're pushing forward from Supernal, from both the ground and the air. So really, really closely aligned strategically and tactically for hopefully years to come in the future.
And at the moment, the Air One project is in Coventry, which is a city in the Midlands of England. Which other cities are you looking at?
So of course, there's the proximity to London with the Midlands, which is a great place to do this first initial prototype and demonstration. Of course, the city of Seoul, which is of course near and dear to everyone at Supernal and the whole HMG team. And then obviously when we look with the work that we're doing with Clinton Harper and the folks from the Urban Movement Labs in Los Angeles. But really our goal is from our perspective at Supernal, we welcome anyone to be part of that, right? Well, our goal is how do we bring folks together, and how do we get that conversation about standardization, interoperability going, whether it's also other OEMs, right, of aircraft, other designers, developers of infrastructure, and doing that at the city, the state, or the region, or the province level, both in the U.S., the U.K., Korea, and beyond, and bring those folks together so that we can make these decisions, so we can move the ball forward, and we can have that ability to scale it when the time is ready in that specific city.
Standardization is interesting, isn't it? Because when you get the big aircraft manufacturers, they do actually, they fight like mad, for every aircraft order, but they do actually work together with ICAO and amongst themselves on standardization. The advanced air mobility markets, I would say, is friendlier. Are you finding it easy to talk to other manufacturers?
I think yes and no. I think it's I would say it's probably a bit less contentious than you would say in the legacy aviation, right? And I think it's because we are in that phase as an industry where in certain areas we got to band together to create what has already been created in the past for kind of general aviation before. I think what you'll probably see is there's been a lot, as you've seen over the last several years, and it's really taken an uptick in 2020, 2021, and hopefully continues, of investment into the aircraft, right? That's the really cool, flashy aspect that everybody wants to see, which is great, and we have done that as well, and we'll continue. But now I think you're going to start to see as a lot of those folks are going to start saying, well, we got to have a place to take off. We got to have a place to land. We have to have a place to maintain. We have to have a place to, bring people through, right? It's the infrastructure aspect. And the aircraft really is, to a great extent, in the market that we see in the future and the level of scale that we see in the future. I think it was Clint, and I don't want to steal his thunder, but I guess I will. I'll give him credit. He said, eventually LA is a really big airport with gates all over it, right? So if you see that in the future, right, and done the right way, the investment has to start going into the infrastructure side, or you'll have this mismatch. You'll have the ability to produce exceptional aircraft and at a scaled production rate, but you won't have anywhere to fly them, right? You won't have anywhere to go with them if you don't have that aspect there, right? And I think it's a balancing act of from an investment standpoint and a capital intensivity. How do you balance those? I think that's a challenge the industry has, and we're trying to get it balanced on both the aircraft side and the infrastructure, and hoping that more starts to come in from a heavier focus in industry on developing out the infrastructure as opposed to just the aircraft.
I love the fact you mentioned scale there, because that's one of the key things behind every business plan. It's scale. No one's going out there saying, I'm going to create a an electric vertical aircraft, and then I'm going to sell 30 a year. Mm-hmm. All of the business plans are based on thousands that I've seen. Do you worry that there may be a point where actually there isn't anywhere, if the infrastructure doesn't keep up? And I know you're 2028, but there are other manufacturers out there hoping to be out in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, no, I think I think that's why our timeline is a little bit different, right? We're really trying to the best we can, right? understand that balance of aircraft production to where you're going to have availability to go fly, right? And being able to, I think the infrastructure is going to struggle to keep up in the early days with the aircraft production, right? And it's balancing that out, and it's balancing it out from a production perspective. I think where you do that, how you do that, and tying that back to where you intend on selling the first sets of aircraft and where they can launch. But yeah, it really is going to be a balancing act. What my hope is if you drive enough standardization and operability and you have a proof of concept, right? There's, let's be honest, there's a lot of skeptics out there about the future of urban air mobility. We can prove that out. I think a lot of that skepticism goes away. And if you have that operating model, if you have that blueprint, right, that says, well, this is how we do it. This is how we made it work here. And if it worked in this city, it can definitely work in yours. And then you can move to kind of rapidly expand and rapidly scale. That's our intent. But it's also not like we're not engaging with other elements as well along the way, where we may not launch the first services. Example being what I said before is we welcome, from our perspective at Supernal, any city that's at the advent of pushing air mobility, get involved, reach out to us, right? Through whatever means, and we may already be, we're engaged with several, but we want to be able to help provide what that looks like, and not just from a Supernal perspective, from all of our partners, so that we can make that efficient and we can scale when the time is right for that location.
Okay, that's great. Global head of partnerships and business development at Supernal. Stay with us. We're now delighted to have Andrea Wu, co-founder and chief design officer of 6 Miles Across London, and also chief design officer of Urban Airport. Andrea, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks. Nice to see you, Alistair. And I'm very delighted to be on today's show. And thanks for Adam for all the great, I totally agree with all his answers. I was going through my mind, what would I say? And I think we're completely aligned.
I was hoping you're going to have a big argument.
We can.
That's disappointing. Andrea, do you want to take us through 6 Miles Across London Limited?
Yeah, so 6 Miles Across London Limited equals a small, funnily enough. So that was, we created that, Ricky Sander and myself. As you said, I'm the co-founder about 4.5 years ago. And I guess both of our backgrounds are in architecture and the built environment. I started my career at Foster & Partners in London and worked on a big infrastructure project in Doha, the expansion of the airport, Lusail Plaza, which is a big new city in the desert in Doha. And more recently, big projects such as headquarters for Deutsche Bank and Battersea Power Station, which used to be, I think, the biggest construction project in Europe. We then founded 6 Miles Across London, which then focused on the autonomous vehicle design. Basically, it's 6 miles, which used to be the route from our flat in Camden to Foster's. Driving that route every day, we thought, okay, what can we do to improve our environment? It's gridlock. There must be a different future for us in infrastructure. So we started with the autonomous vehicle design, which then slowly moved into urban air mobility, looking at innovations and our futures of providing greener streets, more enjoyable public realms, and looking at a holistic overview of infrastructure and where we see the roadmap going for us and for our societies. And then more recently, end of 2020, we then founded Urban Airport as part of the Future Flight Challenge 2, then teaming up obviously with Adam and his team. And we're now very excited, as he mentioned, in 10 days, we will be starting on site in Coventry, site works, and we have an 11-week build program, and the opening of Air 1, which will be a 3-week event, will start just after Easter.
And it's going to take you 11 weeks to build
Correct.
a vertiport.
Mm-hmm.
And is that how long it will always take?
No. So I guess that is a very good question, which comes up because when we talk about urban airports or our family of urban airports and the vertiports' unique selling points, we talk about rapid deployability, easy to transport via sea, land, or air. I think there's a big focus on DFMA. You mentioned it earlier, Alistair, about standardization of components, the ability to scale. It's a modular design approach, DFMA, so it's already taking a step back before you even start designing. We start to bring trade contractors on early. We design for manufacture and assembly because that all feeds into, I think, a commercially viable, mass-produced item in the end. So you have to start thinking very early. What we are going to present in Coventry is it's the world's first working prototype. So we have all these checklists and the DNA for future urban airports, but this one, because it is a hybrid and we had commercial constraints, it's a government project, taxpayers' money, and we had time constraints. It's a big structure. It has a diameter of 46 meters. We are showcasing to the world different markets. So I think, as Adam mentioned, so we're going to have a 450 square meters passenger air taxi lounge, which will be fully kitted out with a retail area, with an F&B area to showcase and I guess bring familiarity to a new type of transportation. That is all about passenger experience. You will be able to see, boards of departure and landing times. You use your app, which we will promote. It's the Urban Airport app, which will enable you to buy things, to book your flight, to book a connecting mode of transport, such as a taxi or maybe an electric scooter. And then we will also showcase a big section will obviously showcase Hyundai's SA1. So it has a proper hangar space where it will sit and be showcased. And then we will also showcase the logistics sector, which we believe will be the immediate one, which is probably easier from a public perception and acceptance perspective, and a command and control center where the pilots will be stationed. And Coventry University will also showcase the disaster emergency management aspect as an end user. So it will be a variety. That's why it's bigger. If somebody were to order a passenger air taxi vertiport, it would be slightly smaller. And we have also started looking into logistics vertiports, which are much smaller, which have a small footprint. We have submitted for Future Flight Challenge 3, have been invited back for interviews. So fingers crossed that will be successful. And that will then look at a new type of something that is a mass-produced item, rapidly deployable, and that can easily sit as almost as part of street furniture within local councils, inner city, dense areas, etc.
Will anything be taking on and off from the Coventry vertiport?
Yes. So whereas the SA1, I think it has a wingspan of 70 meters. So that is a live mock-up, but this will be static. But we have 3 OEMs that will be showcasing live demonstration flights, which we're very excited about. So they will take off, do kind of a loop around the site, probably a 2-minute demo flight. And then they will also showcase how cargo will be delivered and received. So that brings in the whole logistics sector.
That's very cool. And do you, Adam, and you and Andrea have been working very closely on this.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, Adam, you briefly mentioned that you were going to invest in Urban Airport.
Yes. So we have in terms of not just in the project, but in the urban airport itself, as we just really believe in, again, like I said, the strategic mission. The team, Andrea and herself, and Ricky, unfortunately, wasn't feeling well and couldn't make it today. But I think we lucked out by getting Andrea anyway for the panel today. And why we think that is so important is to really be strategically aligned with the development of infrastructure. And again, the team over at Urban Airport really have that. a lot of the things that Andrea spoke about, and which is we're really excited about for this first prototype, really start making this real and showing those different use cases, but being modular enough that we can provide that geography, that customer, that site, what it really is that they need based on using the same principles of design for manufacturing and assembly, right, that Andrea spoke about, similar components. Really, you can just, when we talk about scale, how can we scale it down? How can we scale it up? Using the same baseline assets, serving different purposes that Andrea mentioned, right? This is going to be land-based, but we're also looking at water-based. We're looking at logistics. We're looking at passenger movement based on the same principles so that we can scale rapidly. And just really think that the alignment strategically is great, and we're willing to back the urban airport team as they go on this. I can't stop smiling about it. I'm just really excited about the Coventry event, and be able to show the world, what this is really going to start to look like and feel like, and it's public, right? I think Andrea will talk about it, but it's for the public to come and experience this in a way that they really haven't been before. See it, touch it, walk through the vertiport, see what it's like. Again, this will be a little bit larger than always is going to be necessary. Some will even be bigger, depending on if it truly becomes a passenger and logistics hub. But that acceptance aspect of allowing the public early and often to come engage in this is going to be really important, and just completely align with the direction that they're going.
Andrew, I think in your original Coventry press release, you said there'd be 200 sites by 2026. Does that
Correct.
seem reasonable to you still?
I think so. It's interesting, the conversation that you had with Adam, where we talk about, how real is it going to be? And I think it's important to understand the roadmap, because, there's so many different components which are coming together. You mentioned Volocopter. We know them, our German/Bavarian colleagues, and from Munich. And, there's so many different, air taxi providers, and then so many cargo drone suppliers. And like Adam said, there is like this big mountain of, billions being pumped into and being developed. And at the same time, infrastructure almost has been left behind. Maybe that's the best way to describe it. So I think we came in in the right moment to tap into this niche, to develop something which we will now be able to showcase, this world's first working prototype. And we have a roadmap with regards to integrating pilot projects in the next year. FFC 3, Future Flight Challenge 3, will be an important one, where if successful, we will be showcasing the world's first operational intermodal infrastructure to infrastructure network. And I think that's when we start to unlock bigger challenges, by not only showcasing a family, but I think by creating that network, you then start to see, okay, so how can we overcome the challenges of, certifying air corridors? Do we look to team up with Network Rail, use train lines because they own the airspace above it, to introduce flights from Heathrow to Euston Station, because that works well. The certification is a little bit, easier rather than going across, Trafalgar Square, for example. So we are working, on all fronts. We've been talking to many councils. Obviously, the West Midlands, they play a big part. At the same time, we're talking to different councils, City of London, Westminster Council, etc. And there's lots of support and more than just interest, trying to be the first ones to take on the risk, of showcasing a network.
Which is the biggest challenge from your perspective? Is it going to be the ground infrastructure or the air infrastructure, the air traffic management or the UTM?
It's interesting because we just had a conversation earlier on with our CTO, and it's almost like it's a constant battle. Like, who takes priority? Is it infrastructure, or is it the kind of air infrastructure? And I think the best way to describe it, it's almost like it is really like that. They completely go hand in hand, because while we talked about public acceptance and perception, which is obviously a very big challenge. And we talked about there will be countries, I think, where it will be easier and quicker to implement, that new infrastructure networks because they are more in need of it. Other societies are more saturated, so it will take longer. But I think from a ground perspective, of course, we know with our skill set at Urban Airport, we've worked on so many different types of infrastructure. We can confidently deliver, an urban airport that sits in the city and that, relates to all public aspects. But at the same time, we can't just sit there by ourselves. We do obviously need the support from governments and local authorities and from the CAA to make sure that whatever takes off or lands has the right to fly. We do it safely. We do it in a way where I guess it can be integrated. So I think it's almost like it's literally half-half. One cannot work without the other.
Okay, brilliant. We've got loads of questions, but what we're going to do, I think, is come to those in a minute at the end. They're great questions as well. Adam, if you can stay with us, and if also Andrea, if you can stay with us, we'd love to let's get Clint up now. Clint Harper is Urban Air Mobility Fellow at Urban Movement Labs. Clint, do you want to give us your? I've got a lovely view of the launch there of Coventry City, but we can make Clint bigger. Clint, do you want to take us through Urban Movement Labs?
Yeah. So Urban Movement Labs is a nonprofit 501c3 organization. We were initially born out of Mayor Garcetti's office in response largely to emerging transportation technology that was just happening to cities. And, the city was really put in a position of reacting to this new technology versus actually thoughtfully planning and integrating it in a way that benefits the city in the best way possible. And so, I think we took a left with the ride sharing, a right with the scooters. And, after that, it was Urban Movement Labs was inspired to really be that arm of the city that would work with the industry to really start learning, with a greater amount of detail of what your plans are, how does this new transportation technology, benefit the city? How does it benefit residents? How does it benefit people that may never use it? And how are the impacts spread out? And how can we work together to mitigate those and maximize the benefits of it?
This fits you perfectly though, because you've got a really interesting background. Where do you want to take us through your personal background? But this is something you've been involved in on the ground with general airports, haven't you?
Yeah. So my background, I have 23 years of diverse aviation experience everywhere from I was a flight line avionics technician on AC-130 gunships in the Air Force, aircraft dispatch, airport operations, airport planning, airfield management, airspace management, and education and training. And there's certain aspects of my military career that I thought I would never have to see again once I left. But it is all, fit perfectly into this new role of, trying to figure out how this new aviation technology is going to work within cities. After my military retirement, I decided to pair, my aviation experience with my growing love of cities. And I did that through a master's of city and metropolitan planning at the University of Utah. And actually through that education, I learned how complex cities really are and how difficult it is to manage, a lot of the challenges, that we don't see, and that, planners, transportation planners, urban planners, economic development folks, they're really challenged with understanding, how do the decisions that we make today impact, issues such as transportation equity in the future, issues like food insecurity, homelessness, just some really deep issues on there. And for a while, I actually became a little bit disenchanted with aviation and wanted to leave the industry because I really didn't see aviation as positioning itself as a solution to some of these harder problems that I saw other planners working towards. And as urban air mobility started gaining some momentum, in late 2016, early 2017, I started out in this industry really as a skeptic. And I was a skeptic because I didn't see industry really working with cities and communities. I saw some really compelling images and really compelling visions of, how we might repurpose underutilized infrastructure such as parking garages, within downtown areas. But I also saw some problematic approaches, to where we, as transportation planners now, so I was just working kind of a dual hat, transportation planner and aviation planner with the Utah Department of Transportation. I saw some of the challenges that ride sharing had brought cities and everything. And so when I saw initially we wanted to pair with on the ground ride sharing service, I didn't really see how this was a greater transportation solution for, the wider city or the wider region, and so I really, kind of had a moment of reckoning where, I had to say either I'm going to, be on the side of this and work with communities or, or I'm going to, kind of go against it. And through the mentoring, thankfully, of some really great, role models and mentors on the planning side, they urged me to stay within aviation and really be the community advocate within aviation that, and applying all the lessons that I've learned. And so I started doing just that. And, in Utah in 2017, I started an education and outreach program around advanced air mobility, where I was going out primarily to economic development organizations and talking about what urban air mobility was. I wanted to get away from, a lot of the hype that was probably looking at like 2050, 2060, into the future, and really start helping communities and local jurisdictions understand, like, how is this going to look, once aircraft are certified, sometime between, 2015 and, potentially 2025. How are these aircraft going to operate then? What challenges, need to be overcome on the aviation side, to get to this vision of where we have fully autonomous vehicles, so on and so forth. And really center the discussion back onto, what does near-term advanced air mobility look like? Using existing aviation infrastructure, using pilots, expanding on use cases that are used today, and really help cities understand it from that perspective, so they can really wrap their head around that, and see that yes, this does have implications, and I can have a say in how this emerges. And so that really was the start of my work back in 2017 around, like, being a community advocate, within the industry on this.
So the one thing we haven't discussed, the word that hasn't come up so far is noise. Clint, that is, I think, is one of the biggest. You've obviously got privacy as another one, but noise is a huge one, isn't it, Clint?
Yeah, noise is huge, especially, if you talk to neighborhoods and communities that are already burdened, with aviation negative externalities. Noise and emissions are probably the number one at the top of the list of things that, we need to think about solving. And so noise is certainly a challenge. And I think we have a pretty good handle on, ensuring that this technology is going to be quieter. I think one of the challenges that we still need to be working on is really communicating to the public what this is going to sound like. So I think, we've heard things within the media, coming from the industry, talking about, these are going to be, quieter by X, Y, or Z factor. I think early on they said that we weren't going to be able to hear them at all because they would blend in with ambient urban environments. I think, as we're learning, as more and more aircraft are starting to take flight and we're starting to see and hear demonstrations, we're starting to understand that they're not silent. You can hear them. And so now we need to start working on properly characterizing that noise for the public to kind of conceptualize, how that's going to impact, their lives, at work or at home, depending on, the proximity of where they're going to be at to these operations.
Adam, did you want to?
Yeah, if I could just add one thing on that, Al, I think Clint is spot on, and I think it's great to have all of us on today for this. Is it's not just one aspect of, well, what does the aircraft sound like? There's a lot of that is on specifically on the OEM, when it's taking off, when it's landing, when it's in flight. That has a lot to do with, of course, has everything to do with the design of the aircraft itself. But when working with Clint to identify, well, what does that mean to the people on the ground? What does that mean to folks in Los Angeles? What is that going to mean to people in other cities using what we build off from Los Angeles and around the world? How do you combine that with what Andrea is doing as the chief design officer at Urban Airport to integrate that from not just what we need to design on the aircraft specifically from our engineering and R&D teams, but how does that meet the demands of what we need from the vertiport? Where do we need to put the vertiports? What do they need to look like? Do they need to be elevated? Do they not? These are the types of things that having that understanding from what Clint just spoke about, something we can then take back from a design perspective, both on the aircraft and on the vertiports, and then we can integrate that to make the best and most optimal solution that we can. That's one of the reasons that we're trying to combine all those elements and not just say, here's a vertiport, here's an aircraft, LA or Seoul or London or whoever. Well, now you got to deal with it because it may not work, right? And that's why we want to work across folks like Clint's team and the Urban Movement Lab and the cities to get that right while we have the time to do it.
If I may add to Adam's, I think Alistair, the question on noise.
I didn't
you're
get
right.
that.
I think.
Could you try again?
Alistair?
Yes,
Yeah?
please go. Sorry, I don't know what that was. Sorry.
I was just saying the question about noise. I do think you're right. This is one of the biggest challenges, apart from health and safety, when it comes to public perception and acceptance. There's been lots of different things that you can find online, and they describe it as, I think, a very squeaky noise, as if you're going to the dentist. There are different analogies and references made. So we've gone through an exercise with our acoustic consultants who worked on T5 on Heathrow, which is, of course, which had so many challenges with regards to noise. So what we have tested is if a cargo drone, carrying a standard cargo weight of 80 kilos, if that takes off at a certain speed, from within the building, what is the perception to people? What do they hear? How many decibels should you be looking at? And then we have gone through the exercise to say, okay, if you were to add acoustic insulating finishes, it reduces this by that much. If you then turn on music in the lounge, you will obviously get a different impact because you're listening to two things. If you're located to a highway, which then has obviously a different background noise. So there's so many factors that you can program in. I think what Adam said is right, because that will then tell you how can you, make it acceptable to the public within who are actually using the vehicle, who will be using vertiports as a new piece of infrastructure, and of course then the neighboring communities around it. And I think then it's about how do we start moving away from that concept where Heathrow is really built far outside from London. How do we manage to push into city centres and try and start to integrate it? And then we talk about smaller cargo drones, which obviously then have a different sound to it. And then, like Adam said, do we then start looking at landing at 6 meter plus 6 meter above ground, which then reduces health and safety issues and also acoustic issues. So there are all these checklists that we've been going through, trying to get on the right map, basically, to tackle all these challenges that we'll be facing.
Okay, that's brilliant. We've got some great questions from the audience, if that's okay. So, Clint, you can go first. This is from Ellen Head. In any city, some vertiport locations will be more desirable than others. How do you prevent first movers from monopolizing those locations, whether by explicitly barring competitors from accessing them or by developing infrastructure that's incompatible with their aircraft?
I don't know that the strategy is really about barring competitors, or I think it's really about painting a picture of what makes the most sense within Los Angeles, and then we have existing regulatory controls through land use planning, zoning and regulations, the conditional use permitting process. There's building codes, fire codes, operational aspects that the fire department will look at. So we have an idea, especially within Los Angeles, where we do have a pretty robust regulatory response to helicopter infrastructure. So I think it's more about like understanding how does this make the most sense. We've worked, in the past with the World Economic Forum to develop the 7 principles of the urban sky. LADOT recently released a UAM document that listed, 7 priorities. And then through the work that I did, with trying to conduct outreach with the public, we got 5 community-based priorities, and so now I think it's about, bringing all those priorities together and really starting to organize them and trying to understand, like, how does this inform like land use regulation? How do these priorities inform, the conditional use permitting process, and, using that, as a way, to where now, certain areas within the city, you know, whether it be, you know, areas within close proximity to other multimodal facilities, you know, those type of facilities or types of areas within the city will just start making more sense. And, you know, we'll have, you know, we're just painting a picture of, you know, what is the you know, the most ideal locations within the city.
Clint, those locations, one of the arguments I really like, and actually Supernal has put this one for several years, is that urban air mobility is only going to work if it's mass transport. Are you concerned that there's going to be, you know, the earlier routes, some of the more attractive ones are going to be suburbs to central business districts, aren't they? Economically, you can feel you can. Does that worry you? Is that something you guys are looking that, you know, we're going to have people flying over neighborhoods, but nowhere for people in those neighborhoods to get on board?
Yeah, so you know, it is definitely a challenge, and I think it is something that we need to have, you know, on our radar of things to look at and to be concerned about. You know, but we have to balance that also with the understanding that, you know, we need to, you know, to a certain extent support the industry just to get off the ground, you know, and to get things moving. You know, we understand that, you know, we're going to reach, you know, certain, you know, equity goals and affordability goals through the scaling of these operations, you know, and so we need to get things moving first and then come up with a, you know, a good plan to start scaling upwards. And that's something, you know, with all the partners and all the folks that we've been working with in the city is, you know, we you know, we're happy and we can emphasize, you know, with the fact that, you know, you need to get going, you need to have a sustainable business model, you know, to keep things moving, you know, but we also need to understand, like, you know, what are the triggers that allows us to pivot towards the, you know, getting towards, you know, sustainability, towards affordability, towards, you know, some of the other equity goals that we have.
Andrea, are you going back to Ellen's question? Some vertiport locations are more attractive. Are you hoping to monopolize them?
I guess what we believe in or what we provide our service is, maybe it's the best way to describe it, is a one-stop shop. That means, you know, we provide the ground infrastructure, and we talked about that, and public perception. I think, Clint, you made a really good point. You have to start somewhere to get things going. I'm just thinking about the London underground. You know, it only used to stop at certain areas which were heavily, densely populated. And then, of course, you start to branch out, and then there was the Circle Line, and so on and so on. And I think for urban air mobility, it's a similar thing where you have to first agree on routes that are, you know, heavily populated, and then you introduce the intermodal nature of it. That you say, okay, the last mile I will do by using my electric scooter, my bike, etc. So you start to create a new network that will enable local communities to take advantage, but it may be a combination. Going back to the question whether, Alistair, did you say whether whether Urban Airport will monopolize it? Yeah. Yeah. So, like I said, we are obviously providing the ground infrastructure. We are looking at the air infrastructure. Then, you know, we have teamed up, I guess, with a team of collaborators and partners to be able to deliver it from a build perspective and manufacturing perspective. And we also offer to team up with different operators. So globally, we have partners like Munich Airport International, you know, who have connections to India, in the Middle East, etc. So I think what we want to do is to say, you know, even if we are not the ones who are operating it, we can team you up with the right people, so that it's as easy and as smoothly as possible, because there will be so many other local challenges that have to be dealt with.
Okay, that's great. Adam, did you want to say anything about?
Yeah, I would just say that I think just like any, what are the three most important things of real estate? Location, location, location. In the advent, I think that will be fairly important, right? To get things launched, right? To have that proof of concept that Clint mentioned, right? So that this can become scalable. And then as it does become scalable and it becomes more of a, I guess for a lack of a better term, it's going to take a long time to get there, but a commoditized thing where it just becomes part of your daily life. I think that scale is big enough that, you know, well, there's also laws about having a monopoly on things, but you won't have one, right? Because the nature of it, again, if you believe in this market as I do, this market, when it scales, is enormous. And you know, there won't be just one player that's big enough to, I think, be able to be able to handle that, right? For many,
Okay,
many years to
Adam,
come.
while you're there, we've got a question from Gijing Zat. What is the noise level in decibels for urban eVTOL? What do you think we're roughly talking about? You don't have to talk about your one.
Well, I think the kind of the without putting a specific number on it, and it depends if it's in takeoff, if it's in landing, if it's in, sustained flight. There's to Clint's point, there's numbers thrown out that it's roughly 100x quieter than a helicopter. It's kind of hard to define that. The decibels doesn't always even matter, to be quite honest. It's how, and I'm not an engineer, I'm not an acoustics engineer, so don't quote me on this. But it's how it's received, right? Decibel doesn't always mean what it's going to sound like. Let me put it that way. So I don't even want to really put a number on it. Okay. But that's why it is really important, though, and maybe Clint can speak to that better than I can, to understand even down to coatings that you have on the rotor blades, right? Can deafen the noise a little bit more. The approach that you take, the amount of energy that's used, the size of your rotor. There's a whole bunch of things that go in it from a very technical engineering perspective. But it's not just about the decibel. It's about how you actually hear it, right? And then to Andrea's point, what does it get drowned out in, too, right? And that will matter as well. So again, I don't want to put a number on it. I think it's just important to realize it's not about the number of decibels. It's about how that sound is received.
Okay, it's a question. I think this is really one for you, Andrea, from Kohei Nakamura. Can you advise who will own the capex of a vertiport, or who's going to make money from a vertiport?
Oh God, I put my hands up. Chief Design Officer Adam, maybe do you want to step in? I don't know.
Sure. I think
that's
it's a great question, right? I think that's some of the things that we're working through now as well. And it depends, right? It depends if it's just privately held. It depends if it's a public-private partnership, a P3. If you will, because I think it's a great question because it is going to be CapEx intensive. I think one of the aspects that's so appealing about the team at Urban Airport and why we've invested in Urban Airport is how do we lower that capital intensivity, right? Because that makes it more scalable. It makes it more modular. You have more use cases out of it, especially in the early years on where you may not want a permanent structure because you may want to move from spot to spot. You may want to use it for the Olympic Games. You may want to use it for major events that bring 1 million people into the city over a several week period, right? So there's a lot of things that go into that, but I think lowering the capital needed for the structure itself is one. Of course, understanding where you're going to put these from a location perspective matters, and then using other external investment. Property developers, real estate investment trusts. There's a slew of places you can potentially even get financing for these. And there's the public-private partnership route that we're exploring as well, which also is another way back to the question on kind of monopolizing of things. The public-private partnership, you can't monopolize it in that regard because the public entity doesn't allow for it, right? So there's multiple different ways to go through from the financing aspect, but it will be globally fairly capital intensive. Absolutely.
So I've done a terrible job of moderating questions. We've got some really good ones here, and we're running out of time. There's a fantastic comment from Tim Torber, which I think is just genius. He's saying emergency medical service helicopter may sound very different than a private VIP transport, even if both operators are the same, and you need AAM to be brought to the market in the right light. I think that's very clever. Dana Jensen has said, I might ask you has made a great comment. Porsche Consulting suggests that if, and that's capitalized, you could build a vertiport capable of 1,000 departures per hour, each carrying 3 passengers, you deliver 3,000 people an hour, about equivalent to a 1-lane road. Hard to see how that would transform urban commutes. Clint, quick thought on that? Very quick.
I'm sorry. So you cut out on the very end there. Can you reframe that real quickly?
Very quickly, they're saying you can deliver 3,000 people an hour from a vertiport, according to Porsche Consulting, which is about 1-lane road. Hard to see how it can transform urban commutes.
Yeah. So, I really tried to get away from, in a lot of these discussions is, positioning AAM as some kind of congestion buster. I think, that number, seems extremely high to me. And then again, refocusing back to, what is it going to look like in 2025? When we have a single TLOF type of operation at VFR, we might be able to get 4 or 5 operations an hour times, 4 to 5 seats an aircraft. So we really kind of eliminate any kind of discussions, of some kind of congestion buster. And then just looking at the way cities are developed and the way transportation is developed, congestion is for better or worse, it's something that's all successful cities, have to grapple with, because successful cities attract people, and people have to move. So what we're trying to do is complement the existing systems that are out there. Where I think transit, mass transit and trains can move, much greater amounts of people. How do we complement that system? And how do we take advantage of the synergies of multimodal? The multimodalness that comes from the multimodal centers, and really work to figure out, like, how does this work together as a system, not a competitor to other modes of transportation.
Yeah, actually 1,000 flights an hour is 16 a minute departing, which seems a lot. Clint, you've also got a question you probably don't want. How long do you think it will take LA for the city to certify its first vertiport for VTOL charging, fire protection? Do you want to answer that?
It's a really tough question to answer, because there's so little hard information on aircraft characteristics, what the needs are. There's a lot out there of, what, just in terms of noise, there's a lot out there in what we know the OEMs are planning for and what the targets they're trying to reach. But still, there are very few third-party studies done on the noise characteristics of VTOLs, and noise is a big part of that conditional use permit to understand, what are the impacts going to be on surrounding neighborhoods, and how are residents going to be impacted, with the energy demands, with the operational tempo, with the fire response, fire life safety response. All those things are really nascent at this time, and so, it's just really difficult to put a timeline on, when we're going to be able to have all the permitting structures, squared away, until we start getting some more, data and information from the industry that we can actually put into environmental studies and, put into power and energy studies. That's really going to, give us some hard looks at, what needs to be upgraded, what can be adapted, what needs to be transitioned, as a kind of an in-between solution, so that's kind of where we're at right now.
Okay, that's a fair answer. We've got one. Adam Helispeed's been trying to purchase an aircraft for at least 2 years and haven't been able to get hold of anyone. Not from you, but I think Supernal would be very happy to sell you an aircraft for 2028. Comments on 5G, which I think was something to look at. Roger Noble has said, do you see underground temporary hangaring charging areas as a solution, Andrea?
So to see the underground stations?
Underground hangaring and charging. Do you see going underground or maintenance if something breaks?
I think the beauty of kind of this off-grid solution, which makes it really flexible. And Adam touched upon hydrogen fuel cell generators, etc. I think it's very important that we maintain a certain DNA. Obviously, we're flexible. If we look at things that need to be deployed rapidly, where they have a short lifespan because they need to move around, so they fall in the category of demountable structures. If we look at vertiports that cater to the air taxi market, they might be more permanent. And yes, of course, if the site allows if we team up and provide one for Munich Airport, they might be an option to go underground. I agree. But I think we want to keep it very flexible. So depending on the end user and the site, I think you would obviously almost put together like your shopping list, what works for each site and each end user, and then almost cater and put together your bespoke set of characteristics for the relevant vertiport.
Great. We've also got, just very quickly, we've got a comment from Cormac Mackay. Actually, two. One saying Ireland's aviation authority is very keen. Adam, you might want to look at Dublin, which they're very keen on making Ireland a tech capital. And Cormac also says, many public transport planners are too heavily invested in traditional 20th century undesirable forms of mass transit that are completely ignoring the benefits of advanced aviation to transport provisions and environmental benefits. How are we going to change their minds? I think we'll do that another time. Adam, Andrea, Clint, thank you so much for joining us. I think we've lost Clint, but thank you so much to Adam Slepian, Global Head of Partnerships and Business Development at Supernal. Thank you so much to Andrea Wu, co-founder and Chief Design Officer of Urban Airport, and also to Clint Harper, Urban Air Mobility Fellow, Urban Movement Labs. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you for all your questions, and we look forward to seeing you soon. And don't forget, you need to get to Coventry in April. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for having
Thanks,
us.
El. Thanks,
Bye.
Andrea. Cheers.
And
Going home? You'll soon be taking this elevator to the roof to take a flying taxi home. Well, in a few years, rush hour may be a thing of the past. Wouldn't it be cool if this thing could just fly you home? We're creating the future of mobility.
Who is?
Who are you?
Who are you?
We are, me and my team at Supernal. Supernal is not just for the privileged few, but many people, including kids like you.
And we're working on new technology to unlock the full potential of air mobility. Supernal will bring humanity closer together and building a sustainable future.